So welcome everybody, and I'm here with Dr. Yasmine Motarjemi, that will be our speaker today, and we will have a conversation with her. So let me please introduce her. So Yasmine holds Master in Food Science and Technology from the University of Languedoc in Montpellier, France, and a doctoral degree in food engineering from the University of Lund in Sweden. After her academic career, she started working for the World Health Organization in Geneva as a senior scientist. At the World Health Organization, she was responsible for matters like the surveillance and prevention of foodborne illness, education of food handlers, the development of food safety assurance systems. She's the author and co-author or editor of numerous peer-reviewed articles, books, training manuals, and other publications in the area of food safety, especially also for food safety for children. And from 2000 to 2011, she held the position of Assistant Vice President at Nestlé and worked at the Corporate Food Safety as the Corporate Food Safety Manager. In this capacity, she was, among other things, working for the development of the Nestlé Food Safety Management system and managed various emerging food safety issues and crises. In 2006, she started to blow the whistle internally in Nestlé for ongoing mismanagement in food safety. And after 4 years of reporting and harassment, she was fired officially for her opinion on food safety. This is a very sad story, but the battle was long. But in 2023, Nestlé was eventually condemned in a Swiss court for having retaliated unjustly against her. So she is also a person that has the courage to say the truth. So I don't think that there isn't anybody else better than Yasmine to stay with you today.
Thank you very much, Constantino, for your introduction and kind words. Well, food industry is a very complex network of businesses, which goes from primary production, which includes agriculture, fishery, and then you have the food processing and manufacturing industry, you have food packaging, you have food service and catering establishments. You have cottage industries, which is the informal sector, which is rather small or medium-sized businesses. You have retailers, distribution, sale of products. This is also part of the food industry. And even street food is also part of the food industry because in some countries, street food is a big part of the food consumption, food supply system. But associated with these industries, you have also industries which provide equipment to food industry, equipment and material. You have chemicals, you have food ingredients, you have packaging and transport. And these are important not to forget these companies because but what their practice and know-how is a huge impact for the food quality and safety. And we have had big outbreaks, or not let's say so much outbreaks, but let's say incidents, food contamination problems, where the contamination was coming, for instance, from the packaging, or the cleaning was not done properly. So all this is important. But then you have services which are also auxiliary to food industry. These are private laboratories, cleaning businesses, certification bodies who comes and certify companies, and also human resource agencies. Now, to give you an idea of the size of each sector, which is important for you to know. Of course, in terms of employment, the sector which is the biggest employer is the agriculture, which has about 1 billion people are working in the agriculture sector. Fishery is actually smaller, is something like 58 million according to ILO. These are figures from ILO. And then you have the food and beverage industry, which used 22 million. But when you look at the market worth, the worth of the market, you see that primary agriculture is about $5 trillion, $5 trillion. But food and beverage is $9 trillion. So food and beverage industry, in terms of market work, is much more than agriculture, but employs much, much less people because they are industrial, of course. But then you have fast food industry, which is growing very rapidly, and it is estimated that by the year 2027, it will be something like $1 trillion, about $900 billion. Another sector which is also growing is the food service. And the reason, of course, is that lifestyle is changing and these businesses are growing, this fast food and food service. Now, the biggest growth of the food industry is happening in the developing countries, particularly in Africa and Asia. In Europe is the type of food which is changing. They are producing much more foods which are imitating normal food, like substitute for meat, because the consumer preference is changing. Well, then the change of environment that we have is, of course, a big impact on agriculture, and it creates much problem. But something else that we should also remember is that in food industry we have something which is called food import, and we have about $2 trillion food import from different countries, mainly from industrialized countries.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, in addition to what you mentioned, we have to realize that the food industry is a risky business. Like a car, pharma, transport is a high risk business. It has different risk: environmental risk, health risk. That means in terms of nutrition, but safety risk. It has occupational risk for employees. It has human rights issues, animal welfare issues, finance. So from this perspective, you will see is one of the biggest riskier sector in society. Like the car industry, in food industry, the human factor and the way human behave is very, very important. Now, you see, the food is something that we are eating every day, but this is not the case with pharmaceutical products. But yet, the food creates much more fatalities and illnesses than pharma. It is estimated, someone actually on LinkedIn I found, some 400,000 people are dying from foodborne illnesses, whereas in pharma you have about 70. But the problem is that the perception of society in terms of risk of food is much less than other sectors like airline or pharma and others. People take safety as granted, while it's actually hugely risky, as you will see it, because you have a complex system, and at every step of the food chain there can be contamination. Another point is that food is a very has a low margin of benefit compared to pharmaceutical. Now we have high tech, perhaps not the same extent as pharma, but it is most of the food has low margin of benefit. One of the biggest difference also, because of this issue of perception that we have about food, is that it's much less regulated than pharma and airline. When there's an airline crash, there is such an investigation, but when there is a food incident, like we had a pizza case in France 2 years ago, people died. There is no report, no proper investigation, nothing. Pharma is much more regulated. Every deviation is reported to authorities. But in food industry, there is, because also it's very complex, as I mentioned, and we will discuss further, it is left a lot to auto-regulation. The companies are giving much free hand to manage the safety of their products, the safety and quality of their products, and governments is more interested that, okay, the food should not make anyone sick, but they don't look so much into prevention as they should, in my opinion.
That's a very
Corporations have, it depends on the countries, of course, but there is some data. I looked for data, but unfortunately, I couldn't find anything newer than 2010. Certainly, things have changed, but just to give you an idea, multinational corporation, depending on country, they supply 20 to 50% of the food consumption of the world population. So I have USA, which says 31%, China 25%, and the developing countries is growing very rapidly. India at 40%. So this is actually from Euromonitor, which has provided this in 2010. So we have actually the food corporation. Multinational corporation provide about food and beverage companies dominated by multinational corporations provide 61% of food sold on the market. All. But among these multinational corporations, perhaps have 50% of it.
okay.
There are a number of multinational companies who are dominating the market. These are, of course, one of the top one is, also it depends on whether we are ranking by number of people that they employ or revenue or benefits. So their ranking change. But you have Nestlé, Danone, Ferrero, General Mills, GBS, which is actually one of the big companies, which is Brazilian. You have Kellogg's, you have Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. You have Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. What is Cargill? Tyson, which is after GPS, one of the biggest meat producers. You have Mars, sorry. You have Molino Rio del Plata, which produces oil. You have these are the biggest food corporations, and they have a big power over our society from different mechanisms. One is that they influence science through their scientific network and capacities. They, of course, influence science, and as you will see, science is the basis for policy and legislation. So from this point of view, they influence politicians directly. They even influence food agency structure. I have seen that they have been influencing India, even perhaps UK, trying at least. I don't know whether they succeeded, but at least they tried. They influence prices. They influence media. They influence agriculture. Now, in regard to agriculture, we have a case which perhaps interests you, our friend from Mexico, where we had Nestlé, which was asking Mexican producer of coffee to change Arabica with Robusta and promising them to pay them fairly, but actually these um, farmers went bankrupt because what Nestlé was providing them we did not cover the cost of their production, and so they made a big manifestation, and this is published by an NGO called Public Eye. So they influence food legislation, so they have a big power over our society, but most of all to change our lifestyle, because the way they make convenient food is one hand good, but on the other hand, we are more and more relying on their products, which is easier to consume. So our lifestyle is also changing thanks to them. Yeah. Well, basically, food safety is making food safe so that people do not fall ill from the food they eat. And here we have a slide which shows the type of danger that you can have in food. They are very broad, from microbial hazards to chemicals, and each of these group has a large number of agents, bacteria, viruses, parasites, large number of chemicals. But in addition, there you have the food itself, which can be allergen. You can have nutritional hazards. That means when essential nutrients like vitamin is missing in a product like infant formula, that can be also a nutritional hazard. You can also have physical hazard. So all these things have the potential to cause human illness. And food safety means to prevent people falling ill from food. But now, was the simple way of explaining it. So the importance you realize. One thing I should also say that some agents can cause long-term illness. That means like cancer, like other illnesses, which take long time before they manifest themselves. They are not always direct intoxication or infection. Now, this is the official definition of food safety. That is very important for you, lawyer, because when there will be an incident, this understanding of this definition is very, very important, because sometimes when they will say, oh, food was safe or not safe, you have to be able to know what is the official definition of food safety. Food safety is assurance that food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared or eaten according to its intended use. So if sometimes you have a food which is not fit for consumption, like spoiled milk, but it will not make any illness. So there we are not in the field of food safety. We are in the field of food suitability. Or when they're in the UK and some other markets, they had replaced beef with horse meat. This was a huge scandal, and there was, of course, recall of product. But again, this was not a food safety issue. This was a food suitability issue. This was fraud, but not necessarily food safety. Food safety is when the product causes harm, and if it is long-term, like cancer, it's very difficult to prove it. And that's where we will see some multinationals try to violate the standards, because they know that it wouldn't make immediate harm. It didn't cause intoxication. The health effect is only on the long term, and no one will have the possibility to prove it. And the assurance means that food safety is about what you do to prevent illness. So, unfortunately, the focus of many agencies, regulatory agencies, is on crisis management and incident management. That means when food is contaminated and comes on the market, to recall it or to make an investigation. But the focus should be more on the prevention. That means looking what the company is or the producer is doing, which may lead to contamination. That is food safety. The last thing which is important is intended use, because that's where we will see later on the standards are very loose on that subject. I mean, a manufacturer, when it produces food, it has to label on its product its intended use. It should be clear. Let's say if there is a specific risk that there might be some pathogens that is expected that the consumer has to cook that product well in order to ensure safety, the manufacturer has to mention that on the label. If there is a specific information for ensuring that the product is safe at the point of consumption, and this should be said to the consumer, then they have to label it. It is right that you are very right that the issue of the sugar overlap with the issue of an ingredient or let's say contaminant in the long term. But the thing is that that's a complex issue. So far, the whole issue of sugar in the products is not under food safety. It's not that it doesn't have to do with single consumption. Is that if tomorrow, if you want to say McDonald's has caused safety problem, I mean, you can say McDonald's has caused health problem, but if you associate it with safety, you should say what in the product was unsafe. What in the product was unsafe? Because nobody is obliging people to eat McDonald's every day. It has to do with consumption pattern.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're continuing the discussion on the labeling, the problem is that food industry doesn't like to communicate to consumers that the product has still some risk, and you have to do this for safety. They don't like this, so they do it, but in a way that doesn't frighten consumers. But sometimes consumers do not understand it. I'll give you an example. There was an outbreak in 2009 in the United States where people, 70 consumers got sick with Nestlé cookie dough because they had eaten it raw, while that cookie dough was contaminated with a bacteria called Escherichia coli enterohemorrhagic, which is a killing pathogen. But the company perhaps did say that this product contains raw ingredients and should be cooked. But the consumer didn't understand that this was mandatory for safety reasons. So they didn't cook it and they ate it raw and they got sick. I mean, they don't need to say, but they have to say it's for safety, not just for organoleptic quality. Because sometimes you cook things just for organoleptic quality. So this is very important because there was a case in France where children died with sausages, and the sausage was children were choking with this sausage, and there was a court case, and in the court the judge explained that it condemned the company. It condemned the company by saying that you didn't provide adequate instructions to the consumer that they should perhaps cut this, how they should cut it before giving to small children. I mean, when I look at CSR report, I fall asleep usually. And there is a film called Bottled Life. You should really see that, because Nestlé was, let's say, advertising about all the good projects that they have for as corporate social responsibilities. And when the director of the film went on site I don't know if it was in Ethiopia, I think. He went on site to look at the installation. He saw that most of, most of the installation were outdated. The project had no impact. And in the film Bottle Life, they show. So there is a big discrepancy between what they say and what they do. One example, I give you one very recent example. That you may have heard about the recent scandal about mineral water with Nestlé. And I mean, Nestlé CEO, former CEO, Paul Bulke, has made a big statement, which is on their website, saying that transparency is the corner of trust and business. Cornerstone, sorry. Transparency is the cornerstone of any business. Yet, they have been treating mineral water, which is illegal to do. They were treating mineral water with filtration and other technologies. They were doing something illegal, and they did not inform authorities or consumers. And so they found out that the water, the mineral water, spring water, was contaminated or possibly contaminated. And in order to, they wanted to make it safe. So in order to make it safe, they treated water. But this is illegal because mineral water should not be treated in any way. So, so then they didn't inform the authorities, or they informed very late, and they didn't inform consumers. So consumers were buying mineral water, which was not so different from tap water. This emerged because another company which was doing the same thing as Nestlé, called Alma, there was a whistleblower there who reported to authorities. And then authorities checked the clients of the filter, because they were filtering the water. And they checked the clients of the filter company, and they saw that Nestlé was also a client. And very recently, the health agency of France has discovered that the water, Nestlé mineral water, may be contaminated. I mean, they said that their safety is not guaranteed, but because possibly Nestlé tried to do the minimum of treatment in order for the consumers not to understand that their water was treated, and possibly that's why that health authorities were suspicious about the safety of the mineral water. So this is. I mean, I have many factors, and I will tell you, but it's not necessary in the order of importance. They are all. It's a complex situation. I have realized that, first of all, those who climb the professional ladder, and this is general, they have a careless attitude. They are reckless risk takers, and they have little emotional empathy for the population. In a big corporation, the distance between the CEO and the consumer is very far compared to the baker next door, which is every day seeing his consumer. My experience and my personal experience is that people who have ethics, they are thrown out, and people who are reckless risk takers, they are promoted. And the proof is that the guy who was violating food safety principles, and I was complaining to the management that he's violating food safety principles, he was promoted as my boss, and I was dismissed. Proved in court that the head of quality of Nestlé, who was my boss, was a bully and harasser, a mobber, and I proved that he had no ethics and no commitment to food safety. He comes to court and said the most awful things Like, I don't give a damn about science. I take my information from the cookbook. Then there is, I have to say that no company wants intentionally um, poison people, but where they can, they are careless about standards. So when they can, they sweep the problems under the carpet. Like if they violate regulatory standards, they don't care. And then there is the problem of investors. Investors, and I have now a recent example, but I won't go into that because of lack of time. Investors, they don't care about food safety. They profit, and then they don't want scandals. That's what I mean. It is like the mafia, that you can go and kill, but don't. If you are caught, I won't cover you. It's like this. So shareholders, they say we don't care, and this is a recent example proved this to me. They care that about the profit, but don't have scandals. So if you violate the law, don't get caught. But there is a personal question of greed, a thirst for power. And this, in 2005, Nestlé linked bonuses to product recall. That means if a manager recall products, he won't get its bonus. So with this, they don't want ethical people who will ask for recall of products. The CEO made a policy that if you recall products, because usually you recall products because of a quality and safety issue, if you recall products, you will be sanctioned. With this, that means that this is a signal that if you can hide your issues, hide them rather than recalling products. At that time, the CEO made this policy, and the board directors did not react. And when I reported to authorities, they did not react. Nobody reacted, even in the media. Nobody reacts. They report this, but nobody does anything about it. And the consequences of this, we don't have much time, but it had triple consequences. I have written this in an article if you would be interested. And this policy was made right after an incident where my boss, who was actually a very good man, had recalled products which contained traces of ink, traces of a chemical which was coming from the ink. He recalled that product, and the CEO didn't like it because the product was not. It was infant formula, actually, infant formula which contained traces of an undesirable substance which was not authorized. And the CEO didn't like that he recalled the product. So he made that policy, right? Well, at national level, these are regulatory authorities. Now, depending on the country, this regulatory authority who is responsible for the standards will be in different ministries. Sometimes the Ministry of Health, sometimes the Ministry of Standards or Commerce or others, Ministry of Agriculture particularly. In the United States, for instance, you will find the situation is divided between Food and Agriculture Administration, which is doing more for processed food, versus Ministry of Agriculture, which is doing for agricultural products, the standards for agricultural products. So it's not uniform among different countries. In UK, you have the Food Standard Agency who does that. So you have a regulatory authority who does this. But at international level, you have something which is called Codex Alimentarius Commission. This is an international body which is hosted by World Health Organization and Food and Agriculture Organization. Is huge machinery, very huge machinery, which establish international standards. Now, something which is important for you to know as lawyers, Uh, and in 1995, the World Trade Organization established um, an agreement which is called Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement. According to this agreement, the standards of Codex, which is established by FAO and WTO, as I mentioned, have become the reference for international trade. That means countries who are importing food, they cannot require standards which are stricter than Codex standards.
So it's a sort of the most favored nation policy. So these are the standards, and we cannot have stricter standards. Never.
This basically means that member states of Codex have to align the legislation with the standards of Codex. However, they can exceed Codex standards. They can have stricter than Codex standards, but for this they have to provide risk assessments. That means scientific evidence why the Codex standards are not sufficient for their country. So this is some rules that you should know. And there are publications on these matters. I think actually I have provided some as handouts.
Yasmine, what you know, that is a big question, but what do you think about the adequacy of the standards? Do you think that they are enough to assure, or they are still not enough?
Basically they are enough. They are the minimum that they should be complied with. Some countries may need to go to have it stronger for some reason. I'll tell you an example. Imagine that Codex established a limit for aflatoxin in general for world population, because this is for world population. But in some countries, you have a big part of the population who suffer from hepatitis B. And people who suffer from hepatitis B, they are more susceptible to aflatoxin. So then the country can say that because of my population, we have a bigger prevalence of hepatitis B. We feel that the limits of aflatoxin in our country should be higher. Or you may have a country like China who had actually iodine in infant formula, which was stricter than Codex Alimentarius. This is the commission. So which has standard for iodine or other macronutrients, which was more strict than Codex. Well, it was found out that they were actually giving feed to cows, which was fortified with iodine. So because of this, the infants were more exposed to iodine, and that's why they had to have stricter standards on iodine than Codex. So based on the situation of the population, a country can provide scientific evidence that they need standards which should be different than Codex. On this slide, you see that the big wheel, which is gray, is the role of the government. The government is risk manager. And as risk manager, this is their role to establish standards. But their standards, they have to take, on the one hand, science, the science of risk assessment. That means they have to do an assessment of the risk of an agent, pathogen. And then when trying to establish a standard, a limit, they have to also consider some other factors like feasibility, cost of production, and consumer preference. Sometimes consumers don't like certain treatments or certain technologies, like let's say irradiation. So then, when they are deciding on what should be their standards, they have to take into consideration these two factors. And this is where industry and consumers come in. It is on these other factors, because Yeah, I mean, yes, this is important question. First of all, as I mentioned before, uh, multinational corporations, they have a big scientific network. Not only they themselves produce science and data, which they publish, but they also influence other scientists. I know many scientists, they don't dare to say anything against multinationals because otherwise they won't have a job. Um, and this has started many years ago, and governmental funding for science is also decreasing. So many scientists are dependent on multi corporations funding for science. So then, when I say governments have to consider science, well, a lot of this science are produced by scientific which are directly or indirectly funded by food industry. So that's one way of influencing. But another way of influencing is directly going to governments and imposing their view. And I have one example which relates, for instance, to Mexico, where Um, actually, I think there are two examples. One case is on the labeling for nutrition. And it was found out that Nestlé was asking the Swiss government to intervene with two Mexican authorities to stop the labeling plan or legislation that they are considering, but they didn't succeed. So they so so government sometimes multinational corporations, they go directly to their government, and their government go to other countries and they influence other countries' decisions. And other times they go it through national codex team. I told you that there's this big machinery which establishes standards, which is an international body. But at the level of each country, you have national codex committees. These national codex committee, they of course ask the view of the food industry about the standards which are proposed. And very often they have such these multinational corporations, they have such an influence on the government, they can basically dictate their view to the government, and the government then takes that view to the codex. That is correct. They go through the national codex team, and then they go to and then the national codex team report to international level. But I have to also tell you something else. Then they have also professional scientific organizations. These professional scientific organizations also produce science and position paper and documents that Codex will also take into consideration. In terms of implementation, I have two important points. I mean, I have many, but I will just raise two of them right now. One of them, I regret very, very much that the focus is whatever is on the market, the end products, and not so enough focus on prevention. That means when you go as whistleblower, for instance, to governments to tell them that, look, there are problems. I mean, literally, they have told me there is no problem, and if there is a contaminated food, tell us, go out to the national authorities and tell them. So they didn't understand that when food safety is about prevention. So I, as a whistleblower, I come to governments when I see failures in prevention. I'm not waiting until food to be contaminated to come and report to you. So I'm seeing weaknesses in the prevention. And this, from this perspective, I think their vision is very, very limited. The second thing that I have noticed is that their inspection is not up to date. I just saw this in the case of an outbreak of Escherichia coli in France, where pizza was contaminated and children died. And when I looked at the report of the inspectors, I saw that their inspection methods were totally obsolete. The third thing I can tell you is that also when there is an incident, they don't investigate properly. They don't investigate up to the point of up to the management of the company. They just try to find out, okay, the food is contaminated, let's recall, and that's finished. In 10 years in Nestlé, I have never been inspected by an inspector. Not even when we had incidents, crisis, never an inspector came to ask me, why did you have this incident? Children died, never they came to ask me what you as food safety manager were doing there. Having said that, I mean, I will say that the food industry is also not interested to poison the population, and actually they are trying to provide safe food. I'm not going to say that their food is unsafe, but I want to say that there are loopholes in the system. Yes, is that we have food standards which are sufficient to produce safe food when we put our will into it, when there is a good corporate culture. But when there is a negative corporate culture, then we have problems. And what I can also say is that there are loopholes in the system, which leads that once in a while we have incidents.
Okay.
In terms of lawyers, I think we need lawyers who have expertise in food safety, who truly understand food safety and the concept of food safety. I have had difficulties to find lawyers who will represent me on the food safety side. I had lawyers who presented me on the harassment and bullying, but there hasn't been any lawyer who was willing to take the issue with regard to food safety. So we need lawyers who understand this. The second thing I want to say is that we need lawyers who behave ethically, frankly. I mean, of course, anyone, even a criminal, needs to be what is called defended. But I think what is wrong is that many lawyers lack ethics. And if we want ethics in corporations, we have to start with ethics with the law. Because I'll tell you something. If two things are essential, the two pillars for bringing some order in this sector, which is food industry, one is the justice system, and the other is the media. And unfortunately, in both, we are lacking ethics. When in these two sectors we are lacking ethics, is very then we are actually giving impunity to corporations, because on the one hand, companies are not sanctioned. On the other hand, the media does not report, especially for whistleblowers. Well, then of course there is no incentive for the companies to do the right thing. Consumer organization. So, but we talked about human factor. There are a lot of today. What is happening is that employees are being sanctioned. Employees who are ethical, they are being sanctioned, and companies who are rogue, who are doing wrong things, they are benefiting impunity. That's the situation. So we have to reverse this situation. We need consumer organization to back personnel in companies. Or the issue of company culture is all based on how we defend employees. And we give the power to employees, we empower employees to speak up, consumer organizations to back them, and more importantly, to report when employees, whistleblowers, are being bullied. This case should be reported to shareholders, to general assemblies of corporations. Yesterday, when I asked an NGO whether you want to report my issue or my concern about food safety management of Nestlé to the shareholders, he said, no, the shareholder meeting is not the place for food safety. I want to first calibrate our mind what we mean by corporate social responsibility. For me, I see one of the first responsibility of a company is to meet the regulatory requirements, like for instance, safety standard of regulatory requirement of the country. If that is not met, then how can we say that they have met social responsibility? The second then is these are not regulatory requirements, but they are moral obligations and commitment. And these moral obligations and commitment we find in types of document like compliance document or code of conduct, policies, and etc. Then there is something which actually is a term coined by Nestlé, I would call which is shared values. And here is, I see the type of project which are partnership, like education of farmers or consumers, where both the company and society are benefiting. So the second one is moral obligations. It's not necessary making a service to society. This is moral obligation. But the third one is a collaboration which both society and the company is benefiting. And then there is a last group, which is philanthropic projects, which is rarely happening. I mean, I don't know, perhaps it's happening. Yeah, here I just want to say, when you're reading, when we are looking at things, it often is a question of perception. We read, depending on perception, we can actually see different things. And these are a few points that I want to discuss before going to evaluation, just so that you think about these points when you are evaluating CSR report. And as I mentioned, very often people's perception of food safety is not important. So food safety is not important, hence they will not even look for food safety in the CSR reports. And then there is also perspective, depending on where we stand. Of course, we have different views. If you are writing a CSR report, if you are in a company and write your CSR report, you will write it in one way. And if you are in a NGO, you will read it in another way. So this really how you evaluate it depends on where you stand. So another point, and now this is very important. Very often they give you a lot of statistics. Now we have to be very careful with interpretation of statistics. I'll tell you a joke. You put about statistics, you put the head of someone in an oven and you put the feet in the fridge, and you can say, in average, he feels good. That's statistic, you see. And with this next, this picture, which you are seeing this man drowning, that means you may have a lot of information which makes which makes the company look good, but you may have one incident, two incidents which are not acceptable. So the question is that how are you going to evaluate? You will say, oh, is in general very good, even if there is one single incident which is bad. So that's the big dilemma. So with this, we'll go to the evaluation of CSR. CSR can be evaluated on 3 points. One, the commitment. The second, performance, execution of that commitment. And the third point is the reporting. How do they disclose and report the information? I just wanted to show you that there are agencies whose work is to evaluate CSR report. And if you look on the internet, you can find these agencies which make some sort of quantitative evaluation of CSR reports on different aspects. Each might be specialized on one specific aspect. You have one which is specialized on human rights, another one on deforestation, another one on other things. We can see next one, please. These are some examples which I'm showing to you, which is on, this is human rights. And so there are, if you Google, there is a number of these agencies who will evaluate. They have a very well-established methodology who evaluate these companies for different aspects of the CSR. So here you get an idea, and here is about deforestation. Yeah, the other one was on human rights, and here is on deforestation. Another point that I want to say, when you want to evaluate a company, you have to get to know the company well. I mean, before we said that these are quantitative. Now I want to perhaps focus this part of the presentation on qualitative evaluation. And for this, you need to know the company and the commitment well. And in order to get to know the company, in addition to all what I mentioned before, like looking at their code of conduct and policies and other documents, you have to go and search a number of things. First, to see, for instance, what are the counter accounts? Has there been whistleblowers? So if you Google whistleblowers, we will see now some examples. You will come to some cases where you see that the commitment are not met. You can Google on if there are recall, and this is for food safety. You can look at violations. Violations, I mean, perhaps if there are any type of violation, particularly you can look at lawsuits. If there's, I mean, if you check on all these instances, you will find a lot of information. You can check on independent evaluations. I mean, you can check that, but you can look at NGO reports. Sometimes they make interviews with companies too. You can look at audit or certification reports, but there are not many actually which are disclosed. But if you have, then this will give you an insight into, for instance, commitment and safety, quality, human rights, and other things. Inspections report, that's more difficult to get. You can also look at SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And when I looked at this, I found quite a lot of information for Nestlé and Mondelez and many others. And really, to have a real evaluation is to go on site. Like I mentioned to you with Bottled Live, the director of the film went on site, and they saw that all what was reported was ballooning. Something else I wanted to also say is that in this CSR evaluation, which is qualitative, first you can have already a look at the report and to see how easy it is to read it, because I had really difficulties, even though I went to a printer to print this report. It's written so small that I had difficulties to read it. So then people lose interest in reading when it's difficult to read. If it is how it is worded, it's when they write a lot of words, which is repetition. These are all disincentive for actually reading carefully. Then we fall asleep, we don't read carefully, and so on. And when I call it sweetness, how sweet it is. Everything is good. What was wrong? Nothing is wrong. Everything is good. But we will see, is it really everything good? Another point that I want to say, when you are trying to look, ask yourself, okay, what subjects are not addressed? Now, they have made a lot of commitments in their code of conduct, in their ethic and compliance program. Was all those things, commitment addressed? What is untold? Another point that you should ask yourself when reading is to say, okay, what I'm reading, is it valid? That's where all those investigations, the 10 points which I mentioned to you, can help you to see whether they have left out something or not. Are they providing data for what they're saying? What is the trend, and how they are looking at the trend issue? Was the information meaningful? I don't go through this list. You can have the slide, but because I am very interested in organizational culture, I also realize that this is not addressed, while in the European directive there is a regulation that is stressing the importance of food safety culture or organizational culture. And they're asking that companies should be assessed for organizational culture. And this is fundamental, because everything regarding to corporate social responsibility depends on organizational culture. And then they do talk about accountability and corporate governance, but they do not say who is responsible for what. And this is important, because when they will violate the law, when they will be in front of the court, it's not clear who should be sanctioned. The problem of these food companies is that they are never sanctioned for their violations. When they might pay something, but this doesn't go from their personal pocket, they are not personally accountable. Just let's take the example of a company that I know well. You know, when this company was condemned in court and they said yes, he had been violating the law, nobody was sanctioned. No one. They were all promoted in their position. They violate the law and they benefit from total impunity. When children died in France with their pizza, again, nobody was sanctioned, because it's not clear who will be sanctioned when a certain commitment is not met. In 2020, there was a referendum in Switzerland, which was called Responsible Business. The idea was to bring Swiss corporations who are violating the law in other countries, to bring them to Switzerland and to sue them. And And there was a discussion on this issue of responsible companies, what is meant by responsible company. And one federal councillor said, responsible company is a company who, when violates its commitment, it will correct this. So that is the key thing in a responsible company. A company who is transparent in its violations and correct its violations. But then you can also have a look if the projects are substantial or just lip service. What is the outcome? And what was the impact? You see, what did you do? I mean, you just say you had a project, fine. But what was the outcome? Right. And if there is no law, you cannot force them. As long as there is no law, you cannot force them. You can just name and shame them, as it is being done right now. The only way is consumer organizations to go to shareholders meeting and to put pressure on the companies when it comes to areas where there is no limits. In United States, for instance, there are much more stringent. For instance, you have a lot of recalls in United States with multinational products of multinational corporations, but you have almost none in the developing countries. Have you noticed that? Why is that in the developing countries we don't have so much recalls? It's the business. In a company you have lawyers, but lawyers don't intervene at all. You have the food and quality department, but they just control the quality. They just don't decide about the composition, the design of the product. It's the business in a company, every company is different. In a company that I know well, is the business together with product development center, which decide on the design of the product. The CEO will only look at how much sale, what was the sale figure for different products. In the 10 years I was there, they didn't care about the quality, nutritional quality and safety. They look how much this product is performing in terms of dollars. They don't want to know. I'll tell you, in 10 years I was in Nestlé. We had twice a year where we had big general meetings where everybody was invited and there were discussion about different things. Not discussion, reports, or let's say a presentation. And only one time, I assisted to 20 of these, only one time they talk about food safety, and 10 minutes. Where in the food safety department, we had no saying about where the raw material should come, whether it's okay or not. They would go and import sunflower oil from Ukraine, which turned out to be contaminated, honey from China, which turned out to be contaminated, because it's cheaper. But I want to say, in general, the food supply in general is safe in many parts of the world, not everywhere necessarily. There are very many loopholes in our system, certainly, and these are the cause of the incidents. But what is essential, absolutely essential, and that's where that makes the difference, is the human factor. The human factor. And we should try to protect employees. If we can protect employees, then we can protect consumers. If employees cannot speak up, and person like, for instance, me, is being dismissed because of my difference of opinion, we cannot even express our difference of opinion, then we will be just obeying what the executive of multinational companies wants.
Thank you so much.